Unspeakable, unimaginable cruelty. The father and stepmother convicted of torturing a 6-year-old to death. Arthur Labinjo-Hughes was beaten, starved and poisoned with salt. Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes, supposed to love and protect him, did the absolute reverse to his grandmother's fury.
They are cold, calculating, systematic torturers of a defenceless little boy. They're wicked, evil.
It is one of the most upsetting and disturbing stories of child cruelty ever heard in Britain. Tonight there are tough questions for the authorities. Ben and Paul will bring us details and analysis. Also tonight, they profit from lies and pain. Meghan blasts the tabloids after winning her privacy battle against the Mail on Sunday. Christmas confusion as these children face nativity with no audience. This from the Prime Minister.
People shouldn't be cancelling things, and there's no need for that.
How did it happen? Alec Baldwin's first interview since the fatal shooting on his film set, and bursting onto stage after a 2-year wait, Nina on the new lease of life for The Life of Pi.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. In crimes that defy the natural instincts of parenthood, the father and stepmother of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes spent weeks torturing him and then beating him over and over to death. Encouraged by Thomas Hughes, it was Emma Tustin, pregnant with his unborn child, who delivered the final fatal blow. Today, he was convicted of his son's manslaughter, she of his murder. They'll be sentenced tomorrow. They'd poisoned him with salt, made him stand for hours all alone, and cut up his much-loved Birmingham City football shirts. They had starved him of food and of anything that could remotely be called love. Months before his death, police and social services went to the house. But in the isolation of lockdown in March last year, Arthur's distressing cries for help went unheard, except by the 2 people who were causing them. His stepmother recorded those cries, and they were played in court. A small part of those recordings appear in our report, which we should also warn begins with haunting images of Arthur in his final hours.
This is Arthur Labinjo-Hughes on the last morning of his life. Weak, emaciated and struggling to stand after weeks of being threatened, beaten, starved and poisoned with salt, which prosecutors described as child torture. Later, this once happy little boy suffered a fatal brain injury at the hands of his father's girlfriend, the violence encouraged by his dad.
To see a child that ill and what they were doing to him, tormenting him, abusing him, they are cold, calculating, systematic torturers of a defenceless little boy. They're wicked, evil.
Arthur's killer was Emma Tustin.
He was headbutting the floor on all fours. Headbutted the floor once, said, "I forget, you're going to hurt yourself. I've phoned your dad."
On the day she murdered him, she claimed to police that his injuries were self-inflicted.
And he headbutted the floor 3 times.
Here on this
But she and his father, Thomas Hughes, had been abusing Arthur for months, ever since they'd moved in to her house in Solihull in March last year. In clips that are difficult to listen to, she even made recordings of Arthur in distress. In another recording, he's crying out for food. As a punishment, Arthur was made to stand in the hallway for up to 14 hours a day. His cries for help went largely unheard because this all happened during the first lockdown last year. But both the police and social services did visit him 2 months before he died. They were called by his paternal grandmother after she noticed bruises on his back, but neither social workers nor the police found cause for concern. Did the police miss an opportunity to save him?
The no further action by the police was in relation to criminal offences, but it was very much that it was over to social services, and it was that joint investigation. The IOPC is conducting an investigation into the actions of the police response on that day.
Tustin and Hughes were manipulative.
He's smashed this house to pieces. He's battered his dad. He's hit me.
Moments after inflicting horrific injuries on him, she sought to blame her 6-year-old victim. Convicted of murder and he of manslaughter, they'll be sentenced tomorrow. Arthur's mother is also in prison for an unrelated offence, but she paid tribute through his maternal grandmother.
If Arthur could ask for one final thing, it would be that he was remembered for his superpowers. That was what I will always remember for, his superpower. And Arthur's superpower was his smile.
The boy who died thinking he wasn't loved was. There was just no one to protect him. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Coventry Crown Court.
So poor little Arthur's name will be added to the roll call of children whose cruel deaths have prompted that often repeated phrase, "It must never happen again." But it does. As we piece together what went so tragically wrong for Arthur, our report contains the 999 call made by his murderous stepmother.
They gave the impression of being a loving family, but Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes were full of hate. The authorities had been contacted, yet Arthur's murderer would make the final call.
Ambulance service, is the patient breathing?
Barely. Basically, my 6-year-old stepson is fallen, he's banged his head.
Okay.
And while he was on the floor, he's banged his head another 5 times.
Okay.
He's lost colour, he's got a big lump on his head.
Is he awake?
So what, sorry?
Is he awake?
He's half in and out.
The emergency services couldn't save Arthur, leaving questions tonight for those who might have.
We send our heartfelt condolences to everybody affected. The circumstances around the death will be now subject of independent review. The local child safeguarding practice review.
It will no doubt focus on the fact that Arthur's paternal grandmother made a report on April the 16th after taking this picture of bruises on his back. The next day, social workers came round and saw him in the garden, but found no safeguarding concerns. The police also decided to take no further action. A week later, the social workers were shown the photograph, but there were no follow-up visits before Arthur's death in mid-June. With his school closed too during the pandemic, he had little hope of help.
During the first lockdown and throughout the pandemic, we know that vulnerable children have been more vulnerable, where home perhaps isn't a safe space and abuse is taking place. There weren't the eyes and ears of the community, of schools on those children and families, and those support services weren't as available.
But there are also pre-pandemic parallels. The case of baby P, killed by his mother, her boyfriend and his brother. Of Victoria Climbier, killed by her great-aunt and her boyfriend. Lord Laming led inquiries into both cases in the hope that things would change.
How is this still happening to children?
In the past decade, there has been a marked reduction in the funding of frontline services. Secondly, I think that some of the services have withdrawn into themselves because the pressure which has been upon them.
There are only 2 people who killed Arthur, but could others have done more to stop them?
And Paul is with me now. I mean, it's unspeakable, isn't it, really, some of the evidence that was heard in court, and I think it's affected everybody reporting on it, and pity the poor jurors who've sat through it too. As you touched on in that piece there, Paul, you know, we had the baby P case more than a decade ago. Safeguards were put in place. What has actually happened since cases like that?
Well, a fair bit, Julie. The law has changed so that agencies have to work much more closely together now, police, social services. And actually just this week, the government increased, or said it wants to increase sentences for child abusers. But while the law has been tightened,
budgets have been too, and you heard Lord Laming there in my report arguing that the pressure really on social workers has really ramped up. And not just financial pressure, but public pressure too, because they're damned if they don't act, and they're damned if they do act, if they take children away from good parents because they're being over cautious. Ultimately, there will be a serious case review into Arthur's murder. We'll likely get the results of that early next year. We know, though, that signs were missed, though his stepmother, his father were incredibly deceiving. They lied to neighbours, they lied to social services, to police. Some of this evidence is, quite frankly, the worst that any of us have ever seen. The difficulty is ensuring that it's the last that we ever see.
Indeed. Paul, thank you very much indeed for that. In other news tonight, the anger towards Britain's newspapers that Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, had apparently bottled up during her court case against the Mail on Sunday came spilling out today. After winning her privacy battle with its publishers, she put out a stinging victory statement. She said her win showed the tabloid industry needed to be reshaped because she believes it conditions people to be cruel and profits from lies and pain.
It's been a drawn-out legal drama. In fact, it was more than 2 years ago, on this day in South Africa in October 2019, when Meghan announced she was suing the Mail on Sunday for publishing the private letter she wrote to her father. Today, she notched up another win. For publishing that letter to Thomas Markle, the High Court had already found the Mail on Sunday had breached Meghan's privacy. But the newspaper had appealed and wanted it to go to a full trial. That was dismissed today by the Court of Appeal.
The Court of Appeal upheld the judge's decision that the Duchess had a reasonable expectation of privacy in the contents of the letter. And those contents were personal, private, and not matters of legitimate public interest.
During the appeal, the Mail on Sunday claimed Meghan had shared drafts of her letter with her press secretary Jason Knauf, seen here walking behind the couple. Meghan even used the word daddy to, in her words, pull at the heartstrings in case the letter was leaked. But Meghan today ripped into the Mail on Sunday and the tabloid press in general in a sharply worded statement from her home in California. What matters most, Meghan wrote, is that we are now collectively brave enough to reshape a tabloid industry that conditions people to be cruel and profits from the lies and pain that they create. Because as far removed as it may seem from your personal life, Meghan said, it is not. Tomorrow it could be you.
There again, what would you expect from Meghan and Harry? They've been singing from this hymn sheet for quite some time. And just because they feel aggrieved by one newspaper doesn't mean that they need to attack the whole of the tabloid press.
The Mail on Sunday maintains all the evidence should be tested at a trial, and despite losing against Meghan twice now, its lawyers are considering taking this to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the country. Chris Ship, News at 10.
Now, there may be mixed messages from government ministers and their advisers on what precautions everyone should be taking against coronavirus, bearing in mind the new Omicron strain. The Prime Minister, though, is sticking to his advice. There is no need to cancel things if you follow the guidance.
It's that time of year again. And at Wendell Park Primary School in West London, there's some impressive spelling. But here, like all over the country, the children will be playing to an empty hall. Their parents kept away because of COVID fears, but watching online.
Will you miss them when they're not here?
Yeah.
Do you wish they could come and clap you on?
Yes.
But how well are you going to do it for them at home?
Good.
It's really disappointing. I don't feel the guidance has kept up with the developments that are happening recently. And I think it leaves myself as a head teacher and in a vulnerable position where we're having to make these decisions where with the previous guidelines it was a lot clearer.
Uncertainty over the rules isn't just affecting nativity plays but Christmas parties too, and it is not surprising people are confused. After all, there have been mixed messages. First, the health chief, Jenny Harries, said we should limit socialising. Then Work and Pension Secretary Therese Coffey suggested no snogging under the mistletoe. Business Minister George Freeman admitted he would not be having a big Christmas do, but the Health Secretary insisted, party, but be cautious and test first. Prime Minister, people are confused. Can you clear things up for them?
Yes, the most important thing is that people should follow the guidance we've set out, and people shouldn't be cancelling things, and there's no need for that at all. That's not in what we're saying.
What they're saying is to wear masks in some places, follow new travel rules and get your booster if you're eligible, as the Prime Minister did today. But whatever the message, the arrival of Omicron is causing some businesses to suffer.
We had phone calls, emails about the cancellations for the Christmas bookings. Some of them were like party of 6 people, some of them party of 20, but the biggest booking that cancelled was booking for 48 people.
So what is it that is making people change their minds? Do you think the messages coming from government are clear?
No. To be honest, I think it's all really confused and there's a lot of mixed messages out there.
What about Christmas parties? Do you think we should have them?
Yes. Yeah, we didn't have them last year, so yeah, rock on this year.
And in some cross-party festive harmony, the Conservative Sajid Javid and Labour leader Keir Starmer today agreed, if you do party, you can kiss whoever you want. Anushka Astana, News at 10.
The row about that Downing Street Christmas party and the perception of one rule for them and another for everyone else has been cutting through in today's by-election in what should be the safe, true blue seat of Old Bexley and Sidcup in Kent. The Prime Minister maintains all the guidance was followed. Well, counting in Bexley began in the past 25 minutes at the last election 2 years ago. The Conservatives had a majority of nearly 19,000 and, of course, there is no test of public opinion like a real election to see how their support is holding up in their heartlands after 3 bumpy weeks.
As Old Bexley and Sidcup gets festive, a Tory victory in today's by-election feels as certain as Christmas.
Who do you think might win it?
I suspect the Conservatives.
I think the Conservatives will win.
The Conservatives will win it, because they always do here.
Everyone loves a get-together, of course, so at the Blackfen Community Library, the story about Downing Street staff partying at a time when it was banned has touched a nerve. Sharon is a Labour voter.
When we weren't even allowed to spend Christmas Day with our families and they were meeting up, to have a big party, is totally unacceptable.
And Tory voters here have at least been having second thoughts.
I have always voted Conservative, and I was a bit wobbly this year.
Right, I was going to ask, has it been shaken a bit?
Yes, by the sleaze and the second jobs and things like that.
It made me think about it, whereas before I probably would have just voted anyway. I'm not voting for Boris Johnson, which that would be a completely different outcome if I was voting if he was in my constituency.
Laurie did switch from Tory to Labour, but not because of sleaze.
I'm fed up with the disparity in where the money is sort of at the moment. You've got those that are extremely rich and those that are on the breadline, that we've got food banks in a time when I don't think there should be any more.
Down at the polling station, Conservative voters were again somewhat grudging.
Did you wobble at all because of the sleaze and stuff like that? Do you think twice about it?
Sleaze, but because, well, partly, but also because of Brexit.
Well, I was a bit annoyed, especially when I heard about the celebration over Christmas, which everybody else wasn't allowed to have.
We don't know how many Tories sat this one out, but it seems likely that enough voted to win the day, even if they held their noses to do it.
So no one really expects the Conservatives to lose here, no one from any of the main parties, but everyone does expect their huge 19,000 majority to take a considerable hit. There is some evidence of opposition voters coalescing around Labour, but in truth, the size of the hit to their majority will be determined by how many of those Conservatives sat at home today instead of coming out to vote because they're just a bit fed up with the way the Conservative government is doing things.
Okay, Carl, thank you very much indeed for that. As coronavirus cases rise in Germany, Angela Merkel, in one of her final acts as Chancellor, has approved a ban on anyone who hasn't been vaccinated from restaurants, bars and non-food shops. Mrs Merkel, who had her leaving parade this evening, said it was necessary to make sure hospitals didn't become overwhelmed with COVID patients. People who haven't had their jabs can only go to work if they have tested negative. The situation is serious, Mrs Merkel said. So serious, in fact, that Parliament will vote on making vaccinations compulsory in the new year. On day 4 of the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, it was the turn of a former housekeeper at Jeffrey Epstein's home in Florida to say what he remembers seeing there. He told the court in New York this evening that he had seen both Miss Maxwell's main accusers when they were young teenagers, 14 or 15. Well, Emma has been in court once again for us today. Emma, what have we heard?
Well, we heard today from Juan Alessi, who'd worked for Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell for around a decade as a housekeeper at their Palm Beach home. He said there were many, many hundreds of women that he'd seen over the years there, but two stood out in his mind. Those two girls he thought were aged around 14 and 15, and he identified them as Jane, who we heard from as a witness yesterday, and also Virginia Roberts, the woman who went on to accuse Prince Andrew of sexually abusing her. He said he was instructed by Ghislaine Maxwell to bring them to the house. He did so, he presented them to her, and he had no idea what went on after that. He also was told to take them to the airport so that they could be transported to other of the properties that were owned by the couple. Now, also in his examination, he was asked about a book, a phone book, a directory, which is said to have contained the contacts of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. In that book, he said Jane was registered as a masseuse, despite the fact she was only 14 years old. Also in court, we were presented with the housekeeping manual written by Ghislaine Maxwell. He said it was a degrading piece of work, over 58 pages, and in that, staff were told to say nothing, see nothing, and hear nothing about what was going on at the property.
OK, Emma, thank you. The events surrounding the accidental shooting dead of filmmaker Helena Hutchins on the set of an Alec Baldwin film have always seemed a bit confusing. If anything, the actor himself has only added to that in his first big television interview since it happened 6 weeks ago.
She was a mother who died doing her job in almost unfathomable circumstances. Helena Hutchins, a cinematographer, shot by a gun in the hands of a Hollywood star.
She was someone who was loved by everyone who worked with and liked by everyone who worked with and admired.
6 weeks since the shooting, Alec Baldwin has now given his first full interview.
Even now, I find it hard to believe that. It just doesn't seem real to me.
It happened here in New Mexico on the set of a new film called Rust. During a rehearsal, Alec Baldwin was handed a gun thought to be loaded with dummy ammunition. Now he insists he never even fired the weapon.
The big question, and the one you must have asked yourself 1,000 times, how could this have happened? It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
How did a real bullet get on that set?
I have no idea. Someone put a live bullet in a gun, a bullet that wasn't even supposed to be on the property.
No criminal charges have been brought, but there's an investigation into how live rounds got into the gun.
You said you're not a victim, but is this the worst thing that's ever happened to you?
Yes. Yeah. Because I think back, and I think of what could I have done.
The full interview will be shown in the US tonight, but it still won't provide all the answers.
You've described it as a 1 in a trillion shot, and the gun was in your hand. How do you come to terms with that?
An even tougher reality for the family of Helena Hutchins. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
One of the post-Brexit promises the government made was to continue to subsidise farming, though in a different way to the EU. It would be based on farmers' efforts to improve the environment. Well, today we got the details of payments per hectare. Environmental groups say once again the government has overpromised and under-delivered.
On a dairy farm that's been home to this herd for nearly 150 years, a wetland that creates a new habitat for all kinds of creatures.
I think that's why we do stuff like this, because we see the benefit for the next generation coming on.
James has long been working to make his farm nature friendly. Hard graft that will soon start to pay dividends as the government starts to reward projects like this that cover the soil instead of paying farmers based on the size of their land.
We can't just get money for being a farmer. We need to be able to show the benefits of farming correctly. It's going to be a big shock for a lot of people. It's definitely a step in the right direction. There's a lot more to do yet, but we as an industry need to get behind this change as well.
From next year, farmers will be able to access up to £58 per hectare for improving the soil on their land. That makes it less vulnerable to erosion, which harms wildlife in nearby rivers. It also reduces the risk of flooding by decreasing runoff from rainwater and helps store carbon in the earth. Incentivising farmers to manage the land in a way that helps the environment was supposed to be one of the opportunities created by Brexit. But the amounts of money announced today have led some to claim the government's showing a lack of ambition. The Wildlife Trust described today's announcement as a missed opportunity.
The most ambitious scheme announced today will mean that farmers can still have a third of their land bare, so the soil can be eroded. We need the government to urgently bring forward those more ambitious proposals that can get farmers and support farmers to put nature on the path to recovery.
But ministers insist they have to find a balance between food production and climate protection.
Different farmers will approach it in different ways. Some will continue to run very commercially and maybe do some environmental work as part of their business model, but it'll be a small part. Others will embrace this much more extensively.
And as they embark on the biggest change in farming policy in half a century, both the government and farmers will reap what they sow. Hannah Miller, News at 10. Kendall.
And finally, when the Canadian author Jan Martel wrote Life of Pi 20 years ago, it was turned down by at least 5 publishers in London. How wrong can you be? In fact, it has now sold 3 million copies, been made into a film, and this week arrived back in London as a West End play. But it has taken longer than anyone expected to reach the stage. COVID delayed it by almost 2 years.
It is a fantastical tale of a shipwrecked Indian boy who finds himself stranded on a lifeboat with an array of wild animals who perish, leaving him with a Bengal tiger called Richard Parker. And today, in that boat, the tiger greets its literary creator, Jan Martel. Here comes your tiger.
Oh, wow.
Hello, Richard Parker.
I'm your father. You don't touch me. Touch her.
Alongside him, Lalita Chakrabarti, the award-winning playwright who's adapted his story for the stage. It's not the first adaptation. 10 years after Martel won the Booker Prize for the novel, it became an Oscar-winning film. But the stage transition, which began its life at the Sheffield Crucible Theatre before reaching the West End now, has been particularly rewarding.
It takes so expensive to make a movie. They get kind of controlling, so I had very little input in the movie. But I thought this one, you know, theatre, the words are more important. The visuals are so important in a movie. In a theatre, the words are very important. And so I was a little bit wanted, and I'm very glad how Lolita, you know, I don't want to say we didn't collaborate. She wrote it, but I'm very glad that she let me sort of read the various drafts and have my little suggestions.
The groundbreaking use of life-sized puppets in the National Theatre's War Horse in 2007 opened up a world of possibilities for the stage. Some veterans of that production are working on this, making the writer's visions come to life.
Of course, key to the whole of this is the animals. I mean, how would you portray a tiger on stage? We did joke about a onesie, an actor in a onesie, but I don't think it would have had the impact.
Every single animal, was the fish or a turtle or the goat or the tiger, the hyena, they studied so well the movements of the animal, obviously especially the tiger. And they were also making the sounds too, the animals make noises. I love how that all came together so beautifully.
I mean, there are 3 people in the puppet, and if you just see them working, you see 3 puppeteers, but they disappear within the personality of the puppet, so that, and they breathe together. These 3 actors breathe together in order to make the puppet live. It's a really beautiful thing to watch.
It is, yeah.
The aim is to transport the audience at a time when we all perhaps need some escapism. Nina Nanar, News at 10.
And that is it for tonight from all the team here. Good night. We'll see you tomorrow.